And away we go. It's another edition of the Arrowhead Pride Editor's Show. My name is Pete Sweeney. I'm the editor-in-chief of arrowheadpride.com, joined once again by my esteemed deputy editor, John Dixon. John, much better feeling this week in the, as they call it, the Chiefs Kingdom than maybe in previous weeks here.
I would think that's fair. I think people are a little happier today than they were, let's say, last Tuesday.
Yeah, it did seem for a second there yesterday that it might go out of hand in the other direction, but the Chiefs were able to fire back, come back from that 14-0 deficit against the Raiders in Vegas and rally for a 31-3 run. You don't really talk about runs a lot in the NFL, but to me that jumps out. 31-17 the final. The Chiefs improved to 8-3 on the season. Right now they are behind the Baltimore Ravens, who are heading to their bye week, but that's just because the Baltimore Ravens have played that one extra game. And so the top of the AFC is really interesting. You got to stay on your P's and Q's if you're going to vie for that bye week, because it's crowded up there with contenders. And I think the Chiefs certainly took care of business on Sunday against the Raiders, and they'll need to continue to do so to have a chance at the end of the year for that free playoff win. The Chiefs looked a lot better in this game, I think, on both sides of the ball. Again, if you throw away the first quarter, we're going to talk about that right here on the Editor's Show. We will review some of the injury news. Andy Reid did speak on Monday. We'll play the highlights and discuss them. We, of course, have our world-famous Marinated takeaways, and then we'll finish with some snap count takeaways and the opening odds for the Chiefs and the Green Bay Packers on Sunday Night Football. This has been up and down as far as that next game. We first thought it was going to be Mahomes and Rodgers, and then all of a sudden it's Jordan Love. And at the beginning of the year, wow, the Packers stink. Now the Packers are up and coming, so to speak. They're looking a lot better. We watched them really take care of business against the Detroit Lions on Thursday. So I am interested in hearing what John has when it comes to those current odds. But let's stay with this game for now. Again, we're going to get into Andy Reid and his regular Zoom press conference on Monday. John, we didn't have any reviews, which is terrible news. We got to get those reviews flowing, challenging our great listenership to get us 3 reviews to read by Monday. Sometimes when we're in a dry spell of reviews for Apple iTunes, I have to beg you all. So we're looking for some reviews. If you can ask us a question, you can leave us a comment. We will comment on it right here on the Arrowhead Pride Editor's Show. But heading into this game, and we're going to get into all the good things about it, headed into this game, we saw a couple roster moves that I think are worth noting, John. Mecole Hardman, he had been dealing with that, what was it, a thumb sprain. Must have needed surgery because the Chiefs moved Hardman to injured reserve. This guy can't catch a break these past 2 years when it comes to injuries. Spent that cup of coffee with the New York Jets, didn't work out there, came back to the Chiefs, now injured again. Jerick McKinnon was ruled out for the game on Friday. He's been dealing with this lingering groin injury, John. And right before we got on the podcast and I posted my Andy Reid article to AP, seems like he was spending the day in Philly at Big Charlie's Saloon watching the game, which is a little bit odd of a place to go while your team is in Vegas, like not staying in Kansas City. I checked my homework here, fired up Wikipedia just to remember where McKinnon is from. He's not from Philly. He's from Georgia. And so I wonder if maybe there is a checkup going on, or was this just a thing he did on a whim where I'm not going to be available for this game. I want to check out and see Big Charlie's. I am curious to see the movement with McKinnon this week, if maybe he did get the injury a second look.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting, isn't it? But that's just something that a player could do, is to go to a place like that and watch.
If Travis Kelce can go to Argentina,
right,
McKinnon
exactly.
can go watch the game with some Chiefs fans in Philly.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be fun,
right.
I think. Yeah, I think that would be fun. And, Spagnuolo is well known there. And right. Maybe, he heard Spags talking about it and thought, maybe I could do that if I'm not going to be playing this week. But you're right, though. It also could be that he was consulting a specialist there, because a groin injury is sometimes a code word for something a lot more serious that requires surgery. And you'd want to talk to a doctor about it. Yep. So you'd want to be talking to a doctor about that if you had one going on, and maybe such a specialist exists in Philadelphia. Who knows?
As we know in Kansas City, if you got a little groin, you got to go get it checked out. Also, so we knew McCole Hardman and Jerick McKinnon were ruled out on Friday. Kadarius Toney, this is what happened with Kadarius Toney. He was on the injury report with an ankle all week, John, but he was a full participant. And we got through Friday, and it seemed like he was good to go. He didn't have a status going into this game, so we just assumed that Kadarius would play. I thought that was a good thing because he actually looked like he could be a contributor again, a real contributor to this team against Philadelphia, even despite the loss. And then suddenly on Saturday, it wasn't an ankle. It was an ankle and a hip issue, and he got downgraded from good to go to out, which is pretty peculiar. So Andy Reid was asked about that situation with all the injuries today during his Zoom call.
I think we'll be able to get some work from Nick. I mean, he's wanted to go here even before this, but we're just trying to make sure he's right for that. So, and then McKinnon, his groin's been bothering him, for a bit. He's kind of pushed through it, and I mean, it was at the point where he was going to have a hard time, working at the level he wants to work at there. So, and be safe on that,
So there's the explanation from Andy Reid. They were worried about Kadarius taking a hit. And then the second player who you heard him talking about, I didn't mention that before we started playing the audio, was Nick Bolton. This is a reminder that the Chiefs have not had Nick Bolton for all these games here. He was placed on injured reserve due to wrist surgery. That means you miss 4 games. Nick has now missed the 4 games, and so he could be designated to return. The way that works is he can practice. Once he practices for the first time, he can practice for 21 days, and then the Chiefs need to make a decision on whether or not he could return to the lineup. The original reporting said that it was going to be about 2 months for Nick Bolton, so I think we could see him practice in the coming days, but I don't know if he'll be activated for a week or two here. Really curious. I want to get back to that Kadarius point. Really curious here, John. It makes me curious about what his status is going to be on Wednesday. It seems like this might have just popped up, and maybe it was something where he was getting treatment or was a little bit concerned maybe about a bruise on his hip, but they didn't want to risk it. And why risk it in the middle of the regular season, even after he was coming off a good game?
Yeah, I kind of expected when Reid was asked that question, he would give a little more detail about what happened, whether,
Right.
something happened on the practice field. But it sounded like it was part of his world this week.
Mm-hmm.
But then when they got to the end of the week, they thought, yeah, he can't really take a hit with this. But, the way the injury report rules work, if you're giving him treatment for an ankle injury, but not the hip injury, I don't think you have to say the hip injury is there. Does that make sense?
There's a little bit of this gray area with the injury
right,
report, and
right.
I wonder in the offseason, John, if the NFL makes more strict rules. I look at that situation in Cincinnati where it very clearly, and it's kind of been brushed under the rug now, I don't know if you noticed that, but very clearly looked like Joe Burrow had an injured wrist coming into the game, wasn't even on the injury report, and people
Right.
were up in arms because there's the NFL is in bed with gambling now. They forever were against gambling. Now it's DraftKings this, DraftKings that. Speaking of DraftKings, our Arrowhead Pride parlay, this is behind the curtain for you hardcore Arrowhead Pride people. Me and Steve come up with this thing coming after the Eagles game of lean into Kadarius Toney anytime touchdown. My phone starts blowing up on Saturday because Steve had scheduled this single game parlay out. And all these Chiefs fans, these readers were like, you want us to risk all our hard-earned money on a player who's not going to play? So, yes, the NFL needs a little bit clearer rules on the injury report so these mistakes don't get made. I think
they've already made a change this year too with the reporting. So
with the injured reserve and the return to practice. Yeah. I just wonder if it gets a little bit more, listen, any kind of treatment, whatever you guys are doing, it needs to be on the report. And maybe that starts in 2024. But this was a little bit peculiar. The Chiefs were forthcoming in that he wouldn't play on Saturday, I think trying to make sure that they were following all the rules. It would have been really mysterious if he just showed up and wasn't playing on Sunday. So see what happens when it comes to that. So right now we're just monitoring the injuries again to McCole Hardman. Won't see him for 4 games. We'll see about Jerick McKinnon. We'll see about Kadarius Toney. And you begin to wonder, will it be this week, next week, that Nick Bolton returns to practice? All right, the Chiefs played a pretty good game, 31-17. We've been talking about it yesterday. And Andy Reid, in his opening statement, I thought was extremely detailed. It's not often on the editor's show that we play the opening statement. Usually it's a little bit of coach speak, and then he goes right to, time's yours. But I thought he detailed exactly what happened in the game pretty well in this particular media session. So we'll play that right now.
Starting to come in. Listen, I started off yesterday mentioning about the fans, and they were phenomenal yesterday. We appreciate all that support on these away games that we get. I thought we started off slow, and both sides of the ball, and we were able to regroup, pick it up, tribute to the guys for not panicking, the coaches not panicking, and everybody kind of keeping their head and actually playing better as we went through the rest of the game after the 14 points. And so defensively, it's hard to pick one guy. Obviously, Chris is the leader of that bunch, and he kept the guys going there, and then he had good production on top of all that, so he played well. But I thought as a group, the defense just played very, very good football after those 14 points. They rallied it and made the changes or adjustments that they needed leverage wise, and ended up coming out with a good game. And again, Spags, he kept all that together, and it's a tribute to him and his staff there for doing that. And then offensively, I felt again, we started off slow for the first couple series, and then things picked up, and it's a tribute to Pat and Pacheco and Kels, and how they and they just kept everybody going and with their energy, and it ended up working out. I thought the offensive line did a pretty good job, even when we weren't getting the drives we wanted. I thought they're doing a nice job up front against a good defensive line. So as an end result, those 3 guys had a nice day. The offensive line had a nice day. When it was all said and done, and we were able to score in the second half, which we hadn't done there for 3 games. I thought Nags had a great game plan, and the execution by the coaches, they did a nice job with their input on the plays. So all in all, good day on the offensive side and defensive side. And then special teams, I think, did a nice solid job on special teams. Field position was good. We had to fill in that punt return position and kickoff return position, and I thought the guys did a good job there, stepping up. Richie securing the ball, which was important, and then Sky and Richie on the kickoffs. They did a nice job with with what they needed to do back there to follow Dave's plan there.
So a ton of detail from Andy Reid, I think, on what was an important win to get things back on track. A little bit of the burying of the lead there, John, because it took him about a minute and a half to mention that they scored in the second half. And it's positive that, as I have been, that I feel the Chiefs offense is good enough to still win a championship this year. You weren't going to be able to do that in the AFC playoffs if you scored no points in the second half. So it was good to see them come out of the locker room and be able to put as many points on the board as they did. And it really was, I think, especially with both sides starting slow, it was really finally a team effort that got this thing done. The defense, after allowing 14 points in the first half, only allowed 3 in the second half. And then I mentioned the Chiefs being able to score. They were able to score 17 points in the second half after that 3-game drought. So a really good all-around performance by the Chiefs.
Yeah, I know that people were pretty upset about that second half streak. I kept seeing people talk about it all week on Twitter and in our comments sections, etc. And, you don't want that to be happening. You'd rather see a team that's able to score at any time during the course of the game. Obviously, you want that to be better. But I would point out that a team that is going to tend to come out to an early lead in the first part of the game is going to tend to score fewer points in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it is. And so when you're already like that, you happen to have a stretch of 3 games where, you don't score in the second half, your total for the season is going to be really low and might even be the lowest in the league. I'm not saying it's okay not to score points in the second half, but folks were acting like this was the worst possible thing that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
When in a lot of ways, it's just representative of being a really good NFL team and being one that can go out to an early lead and then, just play to win after that.
Well, you knew it couldn't continue. I mean, there's such a fluky aspect to them not being able to score in the second half. And it also comes down to not allowing Harrison Butker to kick if you feel like if you're fourth and close, or it comes down to game time situations and so on and so forth. And so the Chiefs got back together and were able to score 17 points in the second half. And it was a really nice effort and it really put the game out of reach. Once the Chiefs had a lead, it just had the feel of a game, regardless of how much they won by, where the Raiders weren't going to be able to get it done. And so I thought that was important. A big part of that was this supplemental production beyond Travis Kelce, maybe even bigger than scoring 3 points in the second half. To me, was just the production that you saw, not only for Richie Rice, who broke out for 8 receptions for 107 yards and a touchdown, but also without McKinnon. We had mentioned that. Without McKinnon, you had Pacheco in the passing game, got 5 receptions in the passing game for 34 yards. I thought Sky Moore, in more of this role player depth type of role, looked really good. 3 catches for 34 yards. Marquez Valdes-Scantling continues to make a case for being included less and less in the offensive game plan with his day. I know that he does things away from the ball, but I just tend to think you got to start to lean into these younger guys. And you saw the Chiefs, I think, start to do that in this game, in particular with Rice. Reid didn't mention Rice in the opening statement. So I said to Andy during this press conference, what gives? We got to talk about Richie. Here was Reid's answer.
Should have mentioned Richie in the opening remarks there, Pete. He's been getting better every week. And he's working to be more Patrick friendly, and so not that there's a lot that goes into that when you say something like that. So, and a lot of it is just playing, but being willing to fit your game into the offense's game and how Patrick sees things. And so he's done a nice job of being open that way, and listening and kind of deciphering what defenses work with what routes and how to manipulate that. So, and Kelce has been a good example for him and has been, had some good input there too. So, but anyways, I didn't mean to skip him, but it was good. It was a good offensive. It was good to be productive, as opposed to the first half, to be able to kind of get a complete game after the first couple series.
Yeah, so if you go back and listen to the full press conference, which you can do on From the Podium, my question was more about Rice's production leading to a breakthrough. And I don't think Andy Reid is going to sit there and say, yeah, it's a breakthrough, because that means he's sliding what the offenses look like. And I don't think he ever wants to do that. But in the detail of his answer, by citing to me like Patrick friendly and by citing to me right place, right time, opposing defenses, I think he more or less was saying yes, which is a really big part of this to me, because if Reid thinks that this was a breakthrough, which I tend to think he does, then you can expect this to continue in a game like Sunday night against the Packers. And if Rice can be as productive as he was in Vegas, or at least be this clear second option as you're getting the attention that Travis Kelce gets. And I think about even like the defensive line. Like, look at how productive Karlaftis and Dana are because of the attention that Chris Jones sometimes get. And if you start to get that on offense with Rashee Rice being that next target in the passing game, with Isaiah Pacheco in the run game, with some of those contributions from other receivers and other tight ends like a Noah Gray or a Sky Moore, if Kadarius Toney could stay on the field and be someone as far as like a secondary contributor, and I think this offense is going to look a lot better. And crossing your fingers here, right? Like knocking on all the wood. It's not so bad that the offense is peaking at this point of the season. Sometimes in these recent Chiefs seasons, we've seen the offense be really good at the beginning, kind of tail off, and then needing to find that before the playoffs begin. To me, this is building toward when you want the offense to be clicking on all cylinders.
Yeah, we don't seem to be bothered by the defense taking a while to figure out how they're going to get things done. At least in the last few seasons, we've seen that happen, and we've learned we can't get too worked up about it if we get to halfway through the season and the defense isn't being very productive, because Spagnuolo has shown that he can get it turned around once he figures out exactly what the way to handle the group of people that he's got. Why can't it be that way on the offensive side of the ball? I mean, again, it's not that we want the offense to be slow. It's been great that the defense has been terrific right from the opening week of the season. But it's not like we haven't seen this happen on the other side of the ball, and it leads to a Super Bowl victory. So I'm not too worried about it yet. Or still, I don't know which it is.
Yeah. And, part of the offensive success recently, and I think the comfort that you're beginning to see is coming in short yardage. The Chiefs were, I think, baffled by what to do on short yardage earlier in the year. It was clear, it was gimmicky, it wasn't working. And it seems like for whatever reason in the past recent weeks, it's been simplified. A lot of that has been, let's let this angry MFer Isaiah Pacheco angrily MF his way to past the first down marker. And here was Andy Reid on some of that recent short yardage success.
Matt and Andy Heck head that up. Tom Melvin and Corey Matei, they all kind of join in on that and work the run and the pass game together in those situations. So they've done a nice job with it. The more guys that are available, that are threats there that you can utilize from a coaching standpoint, it's a positive thing. And so, we were talking an example with Richie that he's getting better. Well, those are situations that he's becoming more familiar with, and now he can be part of that equation of helping out there. And then Kelce, likewise, and then Pacheco and Clyde are doing a nice job likewise. And Clyde stepped in, for McKinnon in the third down stuff and did a good job along with Pacheco. So
Pacheco looks good enough to me right now where even if the opposing team knows he's coming, it's not mattering. Like I think that a lot about Philadelphia and the tush push, of course. I mean, this has been going on since last year, so it's going to get a lot more publicity. But if the Chiefs can match that with something on their own, then it also, and Andy Reid's really smart about this, like short yardage, you have X and 1 for all these times. You halfback dive with Pacheco 5-6 times in a row. Now suddenly the team thinks, okay, we got to really load up here. They're definitely, and then all of a sudden it's a play action and somebody's wide open down the field. Like Andy Reid does that better than anyone too. So it's not only, I think, short yardage success, but what the short yardage success doing similar things, similar looks could mean for big time plays in the future.
To put it another way, I think people were really unhappy about the use of gadget plays in these short yardage
You didn't like the McKinnon handoff to Blake Bell or
right.
Vice versa. Yeah.
Those kinds of things are really getting under people's skin. And for those to work, just like with a play action pass, you got to be able to threaten in a traditional way in order for that trick to work every time, like it did in the Super Bowl season, in the 2019 season. Those tricks worked pretty regularly. And Michael Burton was terrific in that one season. But then the Chiefs got to the point they couldn't reliably run the ball between the tackles, and then those tricks didn't work anymore. So I think what we're seeing here is they recognize that they're trying to make it more of a across the board threat in short yardage, which will give them more opportunities to do different things that might even end up being big plays.
Once again, you can listen to that full press conference right here on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network on From the Podium. This is the Arrowhead Pride Editor Show. When we come back, it's those world famous marinated takeaways. Stay with us. Back here on the Arrowhead Pride Editor Show, it's a beautiful day in Chiefs land with the team now at 8-3, coming off a big time win against the Las Vegas Raiders. We're going to get into marinated takeaways. I know you hear the music, but John, before we do, I thought this was interesting and somewhat relevant in Kansas City because you know about the trials and tribulations of Marcus Peters. Peters had an argument, it seemed like, with his coaching staff of the Raiders yesterday. He was visible on the sidelines. There was some kind of conversation with him and interim head coach Antonio Pierce before heading into the locker room, but it seemed like he almost took himself out of the game, was not part of a defensive huddle late as the Raiders were trying to rally. And then this morning, the Raiders ended up cutting Marcus Peters. And so just a note there that very interesting that against his former team where, I know there had been similar rumblings of problems with the coaching staff and they ended up moving on from him. But eventually he's been bounced around between a couple teams, Rams and Ravens included, now on the open market once again.
Wow, I did that piece of news had escaped me this morning. I had my head down working on post game coverage. I didn't see that it happened.
John Dixon on the Arrowhead Pride Editor.
Yeah,
so that's right.
Sometimes it takes me a minute to catch up on this stuff on a day after the game day. So wow, what a story that is. I'm sure there'll be people right now saying we should go get him, but I don't think that's going to happen.
It won't happen in Kansas City. I do wonder if there's some playoff team around the league, maybe not your starting cornerback, but that it takes a shot on. It's hard to teach that ball hawk thing that he has, but it comes with a lot of that sometimes off the field fire. So we'll see where Marcus Peters lands. All right, let's get into the meat of this game. 31-17 Chiefs. The final Raiders dropped to 5-7. As I said, the Chiefs improved to 8-3. John, it's time for the world famous marinated takeaways. What's number one in your mind?
Well, I'm going to kind of marinate takeaways from two games because we talked about the Eagles game before it happened. We haven't had an opportunity to talk about that on the podcast. So I want to meld a couple of things together here from what we've seen from these two games. And one of them involves Travis Kelce. I know that people were unhappy about the offensive production that the team has had and wanted to put a lot of it on Travis Kelce not producing as he had, pointing out correctly that he'd had 3 games with yardage below 50 yards. In fact, the 3 games in question were for 14, 26, and 44 yards, a total of 84 yards in 3 games. And people were saying, my gosh, he's not what he used to be. This is bad. Well, I looked. Last year, his 3 lowest producing games were for 25, 38, and 43. That's 96 yards. And the year before that, the 3 lowest games were 23, 25, and 27. That's even less, 75 yards. Point being that Travis Kelce always has games like this. The reason he gets to over 1,000 yards every year is that he has 4 or 5 games where he's over 100 yards. He has a couple of games where he threatens to reach 200 yards. And then he's got a lot of games where he's down around 50 or 60 yards and so on and so forth. Right now, he's at 732 yards for the season. He only has to average 45 yards a game in order to reach another 1,000-yard season. So I know everybody is concerned about Travis Kelce's age and that he's dating Taylor Swift and he's talking about retirement and all these things. But he's really putting in the same kind of season we typically see. It may be a little bit less than we've seen in previous seasons, but it's also pretty much the same.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say age or not. And when I say that, he suffered an injury right before the year started, the hyperextended knee and then the ankle. And I think you can make a case, is he 100% from get-go this year? I don't think he's ever going to be 100% this year. that was a significant injury to suffer, and he missed the first game, but was able to come back the next week, and kind of hasn't really gone talked about. Now, does he suffer that injury if he's younger? Was it more of a freak thing? Does he have the ankle? That can go into older age, right? I mean, he did have that article that came out, Wall Street Journal, where he essentially, for the first time, was honest about just his surgeries and his body being beaten up and just where he's at. And I do think it is news because he's never talked like that before. The interview with the Wall Street Journal, I do think it's news that he said retirement is on his mind. And I mean, you're seeing a lot of success off the field where it's really, I think, in his mind, becoming visible, where it's not like the fame is going to necessarily go away. It's going to be different. It's always going to be at its peak when you're an actual NFL player, but there's a life after football. I mean, he could be an actor. He could be somebody that does football coverage like you see with the Manning brothers. He could do his clothing thing, the modeling thing. There's a lot of angles and a lot of people even think the acting thing he's good at. Just besides being a great football player, he on SNL was, pretty good. And of course there's the whole Taylor Swift thing. So that to me is news. I'm with you in like this freak out about Travis Kelce and him maybe not having 1,000 yards. It's not news. I mean, I think for a second I thought about it, but what do the Chiefs have left here? 6 games, John. He's at 732.
Yeah.
Unless he suffers another injury, which you're always knocking on wood and crossing your fingers about that. Unless he suffers another injury, crazy to say it, but 1,000 yards is in the books essentially.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like for him, even if he were to have 50 yards a game, doesn't matter. I mean, he's going to get there. So will be really interesting to see if the Chiefs do it again this year, if they are able to repeat as Super Bowl champions with everything that we've just learned about him. And just this past game, he reached 11,000 receiving yards. No Chief in NFL or no Chief in history has ever done that. Like he's done a lot of things. He's already going to be in the Hall of Fame. I think it's, for me, this past week's news became more of a year by year thing with Kelce than I thought it had been. I was assuming, at least 2 to 3 more years, at least. Whereas now, I don't know. If they were to do it again and win a title, would he just call it? I tended to think that he was chasing Tony Gonzalez, but these words were different. And I don't know how serious we should take him. He doesn't really talk a lot anymore either. So it's hard to follow up on any of these things.
Well, I think those words were a little different.
Yeah.
But speaking as someone who has recently been where Travis Kelce is sitting, doing something that I was pretty good at, and I was thinking about retiring from the audio business for a number of years before I finally did.
Right.
And I don't know that it necessarily means that he's close to it. He's just reached the point in his career where he's thinking about it. And as days go on, you think about it more and more. That was true for me anyway. And I was lucky enough to be in a position that I could step away from it and maybe earlier than I might have anyway. Maybe that's true for Travis Kelce as well, but I don't think necessarily the fact that he's talking about it publicly as he is now necessarily means he's in his last season. We could still be looking at 2 or 3 more seasons beyond this one.
If I'm a Chiefs fan, I'm saying let's get Kelce on the McKinnon plan. No need for him to be anywhere close to the facility in the offseason. If he can just get there by the second week of St. Joe, that's good enough, right? Like
that's reasonable.
Keep his body in shape. And not that it even worked for McKinnon. McKinnon didn't do any of the offseason programming, and he's got these injuries. But half joking here. I think the Chiefs will work with him. We've seen them work with older players.
Sure.
This regime work with older players where less practice, less obligations, and just make sure you're there on Sunday, management of the load as they get older.
Well, there's one thing about that. Travis actually likes training camp, unlike a lot of players.
Well, he says he does.
Yeah.
So we thought last year was the offseason of Kelce. I'm curious about this impending offseason, what that's going to look like for him off the field. And I wonder how much he's going to like training camp and the dorm food at St. Joe. I have a similar first takeaway to you, and having to do with the Philadelphia game. I'm a happy, grateful. What am I thankful for during Thanksgiving week? I'm grateful we didn't have an editor's show after the Philadelphia game. We're safe here, right? It's just me and you. I was feeling pretty dumb. I got to be honest with you after the showing by the Whiteouts in that game. And I think you really needed this game for me to be able to come back on here and save face. I think what we saw from the receivers, led by Rice in Sunday, is what we've needed to see for a long time. And I want to go back here. My whole take has been the Chiefs have enough in the receiver room to win a title. I never said that I don't think there could be an improvement. I actually do think that Veach is going to attack the wide receiver room this offseason. There is a nice free agency class. We know about the draft. I think we've seen Veach really attack weaknesses. Remember going into that 19 season, revamp the whole defense by bringing in Spagnuolo and a couple pieces there, Matthew included. Same thing with the offensive line in 2021. 2020 was horrible at the end. It cost the Chiefs a championship. When you get to the championship game, you got to win it. They couldn't win it. I mean, there was no winning that game with the offensive line they had. They attacked that in 2021. I tend to think they will do the same thing this year. Like, I think this wide receiver room is going to be Richie, Rice, and a bigger name, be it a college premium pick at receiver where they have to trade up, or a free agent, or both. Veach attacks these weaknesses on a off-season by off-season basis. I think it can stand to get better. What I've maintained, and I think you're starting to see this with the Raiders game being an example, I think you can win a title with these receivers in this room. And I think the defense is a big part of that. We saw them struggle at the beginning yesterday, but then they got right back to the defense that they've looked like since the beginning of the year. And I think, we always talk about the same stuff year by year. Every Mahomes team is going to look a little bit different, especially as you go here and as the money changes hands and whatnot. And maybe in previous championship teams, it's been offense, Legion of Zoom. We're going to kill you. We're going to outscore you. Whereas this year, I just think it can be a complete team thing where the defense does its job, the offense does its job, as long as they can build off of this performance moving forward. And regardless of how it looks, what really matters at the end of the day, if you're holding the Lombardi Trophy, I don't think it matters if the receiver room is a little bit less than it's been in previous years. And I think, thank God, we didn't have to do a show after last game, because it would have been hard for me to say that with a honest, straight face.
Nobody would have believed you. No.
Following Monday Night Football, whereas now I do feel like that here after this game.
Well, I agree with you. I think that it was very hard to get that perspective after that game. I was a little surprised by the reaction, frankly, to the game, because, the wide receiver issues were certainly part of the equation, but the Chiefs lost that game because of 2 turnovers. Without one of those turnovers,
right,
the Chiefs win that game. And I don't think there's a lot of room to argue that position.
And I don't blame people for this, but there are these blockers when it comes to really bad plays for Mahomes and Kelce. And they probably deserve those blockers after all the good that they have done for years and years. And I felt that way about the Eagles game. Those were 2 really bad mistakes from your 2 best players. And everyone wanted to talk about the Marquez, what could have been a game-saving play. You wouldn't have needed the game-saving play necessarily.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so that play might not have even happened if one of those turnovers hadn't occurred in the red zone. I mean, those are just terrible, and they're going to happen. I don't think we should get rid of Patrick Mahomes because he threw an interception in the red zone. I don't think we should get rid of Travis Kelce because he fumbled the ball in the red zone. Right. Those are just mistakes that are going to happen in a game, especially when you're playing a really good team. And guess what? The Philadelphia Eagles are a really good team. So.
All right, John, let's stay with you for Marinated takeaway number 2.
Okay, back to more feedback from the Eagles game. People went nuts over the Chiefs leading the league with 26 drops. Kevin Harlan mentioned it in the play-by-play during the game on Sunday, noting that there are several sources for drops statistics, and they didn't all agree necessarily, but they all said that the Chiefs were one of the league's worst. And of course, it's a counting stat, which means that it varies by, how many passes you throw and a lot of things that aren't necessarily important with regard to the stat itself. You're much better with a rate stat. And Pro Football Reference has one. And sure enough, using the rate stat, the Chiefs are at the top of the league. They're the worst team in drops. But let's put some perspective on that. The Chiefs have a 6.7% drop rate, which sounds pretty bad. But you know who else has a 6.7 drop rate? Tyreek Hill as a player. Austin Eckler as a player has a 9.1% drop rate. The worst drop rate among qualifying players in the NFL is 18.1%. By comparison, the Chiefs' worst drop percentage is Kadarius Toney at 10%, Rashee Rice 8.9%. The guy everybody has wanted to cut this week because he drops the ball so much, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, 7.1%, just above what Tyreek Hill does and better than Austin Eckler.
Right.
And then you have Justin Watson at 7.7%. So the point of this is that there needs to be some perspective about what drops really mean. And they aren't a be all end all kind of statistic. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the teams that are best in this metric, they include the 49ers, 1.9% as a team, the Eagles, 2.8% as a team, the Texans, 3.3%. Those teams are all up at the top. You know who else is up at the top? The Broncos at 2.5%, the Giants at 2.6%, the Patriots at 3.6%. In other words, it's nice to have a really low drop percentage, but it's not something that's going to mean your team is good or bad. It just is part of the picture.
Causation versus correlation.
Exactly.
As we learned in high school. I agree. For whatever reason, and I'm not looking at numbers that you're looking at, John. It's almost like that they should fire Rashee Rice a pass early, let him drop it, and then he could just shine the rest of the game. It's almost like he needs to get it out of the way before he has a great game for the Chiefs.
That's the pattern we had yesterday for certain. That's what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a Rice believer. I mean, I think the Chiefs would be a more efficient offense if they didn't have the drops. And I think those things come a little bit more into the spotlight when you have as bad of a drop as Marquez did, right? Like, now you're
that's
like,
right.
Okay, well, how bad is this problem? And you're like, this one ant has led to a colony of ants in my kitchen, and now I have to call the exterminator. My next Marinated takeaway is that I think Isaiah Pacheco, beyond Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, as much as I love Rice, is the third best offensive player. I've been kind of saying this all year, and I think you saw it proved against the Raiders. I actually love him as a pass catching back as well. That is a part of his game that he's really developed. I know the Chiefs still are going to try to play McKinnon, I think, down the stretch because he's the best pass blocker when it comes to your running back. So it's not like he's going to be without a role, your third down back. Clyde did a little bit of that yesterday. But Bert Breer said this of Sports Illustrated: Isaiah Pacheco runs like he's getting ready to hurt someone on every play. Andy Reid, after the game, said, those are the toughest 55 yards I've ever been around. This dude needs to be touching the ball, right? Like, how many times do I say it? People who really listen to the show a lot, you know how I feel about Isaiah Pacheco touching the football, and you see what it means for the offense. This is what I'm talking about. He touched it 20 times yesterday. He is a scary, scary player. He'll open things up for Travis Kelce because you got to have guys rallying to him to get him on the ground. He'll open things up when the offense, needs a quick pass, an outlet, a check down, maybe even a design screen, and he can be effective that way. And again, if now suddenly you have three of these weapons in the Chiefs offense, like, what else do you want here? I know you could load up the wide receiver room, like the Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver room with Brown and Smith, very enviable. But if you have, and you're actually feeding these guys, Kelce and Pacheco and Rice, and then you could get some of those other guys in the mix here and there, I think you got a pretty good offense, and an offense with, compared to this defense, that again can get you there. It's not going to be like previous years where the offense steamrolls anybody, but I just think Pacheco being a huge part of that is only going to help this offense become what it needs to be to win a title.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's another example of how a single statistic can be misleading. Yesterday, he averaged 3.7 yards an attempt. And for guys who, loved Jamal Charles when he was putting in games where he averaged
5.5.
You'd put in a game where he's over 5 yards a carry, you're going, oh my God, this shows you what a great back he is. But on Sunday, Pacheco averaged just 3.7 yards, his longest just 8 yards, but he had 2 touchdowns. And I think it was you that pointed this out in your reaction piece yesterday. There were 4 short yardage situations where they put Pacheco in the game and he ran between the tackles and converted every time.
Yeah.
And that's what you remember about this game. He had an outsized impact on it, even though he only had 55 yards. I think Andy Reid put it exactly right.
Fantasy football is so big now, like talking about the NFL. If he got the volume like some of these other backs do around the league, he would be considered one of the best players in the NFL. It's just the Chiefs' offense is pass first. I'm telling you, watching him he's unlike any running back. I watch a lot of these games. I watch the game tonight, even though it's not really a good game. What is it, Steve? It's Vikings. I'm gonna watch the Vikings and the Bears. I'm okay, Steve. I'm gonna watch the Vikings and the Bears tonight. I enjoy watching it. Whatever. He's one of the better backs in the NFL. I just don't think he gets the opportunity that other players get. And what a year to do it when you're not as confident as you are beyond Travis Kelce in the passing game. And I think you see what it means for the passing game. Like Pacheco got 20 touches, John. Mahomes was only 2 yards shy of having 300 yards passing, right? Like it could have easily have been 300. And that's where you want to be. And I hope they continue to give Pacheco opportunities. All right, let's get to your final takeaway, John.
I thought it was real interesting yesterday. This has nothing to do with the Eagles game. Finally, we're just talking about yesterday's game. I thought it was real interesting that they had Richie James and Sky Moore side by side back there for kickoffs. I thought that was a very unusual thing. It was something you used to see all the time in the NFL, and now you don't see it very often. Nowadays, they'll have an extra guy up forward as a blocker rather than having 2 guys back there, one on each side of the center line of the field. And watching it, I think what it was having one guy who could be the eyes of the other guy. So the other guy can pay attention to catching the ball instead of trying to pay attention to what's coming down the field. And you know what? I thought that was pretty smart. That the experienced Richie James can be watching the coverage come down the field and shout out to Sky, okay, drop it. Oh, no, let it go. So they can make the right decision in that situation.
One day when one of us leaves Arrowhead Pride or you're done or I'm done, you're going to reveal to me that you and Dave Tobe have lunch every Wednesday. You always include a Dave Tobe note, but I like it. I
thought it was interesting. I hadn't seen it for a long time.
That's an intriguing point to make, and I think you're right. And if I'm that team too, I'm kicking it to Sky Moore every time. Like if you're giving me 2 options, and if I'm doing my scouting, why not just make sure that he can still catch the football? But I actually have liked Richie James in the return game. I'm actually surprised. I was looking at snap counts. I know we're going to get into that in a second here, but I was surprised to see him not really get as much play on offense. I hope that he continues to get looks. I don't mean to be Chiefs fan on X that is trying to find something to complain about, but I wouldn't mind seeing James get some of those looks that Marquez gets. It seems like they're still including Marquez. I'm at the point where I don't care how much money Marquez Valdez-Scantling makes. I just think they got to give other guys opportunities. We're a little bit behind on the schedule for this podcast. We try to keep it an hour, so I'll make this last point quick. I thought the Chiefs were really impressive against 2 stars of the NFL, truly, Josh Jacobs and Davante Adams in the second half. They let them get theirs. No arguing that in the first half. It was a disaster, borderline disaster. Davante Adams, no yards in the second half, and then Josh Jacobs, I believe he only had 16 rushing yards after having nearly 100 in the first half. And that was the key to the game, right? Like if a team is going to get back in the game, they're going to go back to their stars, especially when you allow the running back a 63-yard run for a touchdown. Looked like the defense was reverting a little bit. And then I thought it was just very, very impressive that they were able to settle back in. And I know these guys are Raiders. I know we like to make fun of them. But, I was just mentioning Pacheco as one of the best running backs in the NFL. Jacobs is already there. Like, no one argues that.
Right.
And same thing, obviously, with Adams, top 5 easily, if not top 3, whatever you want to say. And so really nice job in the second half against those guys. And I thought that was a big part of them managing the victory. All right, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll have some snap count takeaways, and we'll get into the initial odds, Chiefs and Packers on Sunday Night Football. This is the Arrowhead Pride Editor Show. Stay with us. Back here on the Arrowhead Pride Editors Show, the Chiefs coming off their win against the Las Vegas Raiders, 31-17. John, I'll turn it over to you as you take an initial glance at these snap counts from the game. Anything stand out to you that we ought to discuss?
Well, I always like to talk about this, the pass-run ratio. Just like it was against the Eagles game, it was at 60-40 pass over run, which is a little more running than we typically see from Andy Reid. And I think that's the number we've been looking for, to get just a little more of the running game involved in the offense. I think we saw that it helped against the Eagles. Again, absent the turnovers, the Chiefs would have won that game. And in this game, absent turnovers, the 60-40 ratio did very well, putting 31 points on the scoreboard. So I thought that was a big, important thing. Another thing that I thought was interesting was that Isaiah Pacheco had his season high at 79%.
Yeah.
So rather than bring in Edwards-Helaire to do exactly what McKinnon had been doing, they let Pacheco carry some of that load that is normally handled by McKinnon himself, which I thought was interesting. I think Edwards-Helaire had like 11 snaps or something like that. I didn't happen to write that one down, but I thought that was also an interesting thing, and it goes along with the point that you were making, I think.
Yeah, and I think when you're giving Pacheco that many snaps, and by extension, I think you can make a case of the receivers where you're distributing the targets, and it's only like 3 or 4 guys as opposed to the 6 or 7, and you're leading into one back and letting him get into a rhythm. I mean, I've talked about it on this show before. I've talked to Isaiah Pacheco about that, where he just wants the volume. I mean, I asked a very particular question. This might have been last year, but I just was saying, how do you feel on carry 8 or 9 as opposed to carry 2 or 3? And he kind of admitted, I feel a lot better, like a lot, and so it's logical. It's very obvious, but just to hear that confirmation. And then same thing with these guys. I looked at the wide receiver snap count. I've been posting, as they say, them out every week, and Rice ended up with 40. Watson and Moore had 34 apiece. Valdez-Scantling had 32. Richie James 9, and then Montrell Washington called up from the practice squad. He ended up having 2. That 3 or 4 guys, and I know I just mentioned I would like to see James kind of cut into Valdez-Scantling, but having 3 or 4 guys that are getting 30, 40 snaps, I think that's the way to go, to let these guys continue to like play in the game and get in a rhythm with Patrick Mahomes. You'd mentioned, or Andy Reid had mentioned, Rice just being able to become Patrick friendly now, like Travis Kelce's Patrick friendly. I think you can only be Patrick friendly if you're getting on the field for the majority of the offensive snaps, where you're able to get into that groove into the game. And so I think that was a positive development in the snap counts as well. Anything else, John?
You always bring these up as raw numbers, and I always like to work with percentages on snap counts. And I'll put what you just said about the 4 wide receivers a different way.
Sure.
Early in the season, we talked about how they were so close. All the wideouts who would play would be close to the same percentage. Well, now we have 4 that are above 50% and 2 that are well below 50%. Nobody
has wanted to admit to me they're looking for 3 or 4 guys to step up. I've asked Andy Reid. I've asked Matt Nagy. Asked the wide receivers coach, Connor Embry. No, we're good with 6. No, you're not. You're not good with 6 or 7. I know that you want to find 3 or 4. It's okay to say that. Dave Merritt comes right out and says, yeah, let Joshua Williams or Jalen Watson. This is the guy I want to talk to every week, but we only got him once in a while.
One other thing I noticed on the defense, a couple of things on the defense, and it's taken me a while to notice this, but George Karlaftis is carrying the same kind of load that Chris Jones carries in this defense. He's out there 75, 80% of the snaps every game now. We're not seeing that same production that we would expect to get out of Jones, but it's not bad at all. What is he at 7 sacks now? I think something like that. And he's had some critical sacks in games.
If you look at it from a pressure standpoint, I mean, he has more than Jones, but it's just very hard to quantify that, just because Jones is allowing Karlaftis to get that production in a sense. Right now, with the last night included, Karlaftis has 47 pressures. Chris Jones is 37 on the season. again, that was without the initial first game as well. So you have to factor that in. But yeah, Karlaftis is having a hell of a season. I did see he did a jersey swap with Aiden O'Connell. And before everyone freaks out about the Chiefs Raiders things, these guys were like best friends from Purdue, and nobody picks which team you sign with or get drafted by. And so really cool moment. And Aiden O'Connell wrote in a note to Karlaftis on his jersey, "Thank you for not hitting me too hard." So a pretty nice moment for two former Boilermakers.
And then one other thing, not about a Boilermaker in this case. I've been kind of curious to see how Charles Omuah would be used with the Chiefs. And of course, he missed the first batch of games this season with the suspension. And it now looks like he's settling in around 60 or 70% of snaps in a game. It's varied a little bit over these few games that he's been on the field, but that's a pretty high number for a guy who's in a rotational role. I think he's going to be a significant part of the defense through the stretch run and the postseason.
Yeah, it's a good point. Manihue came in in that seventh game, so it could be a case that he's kind of just settling in a little bit, at this point as well after missing that first chunk of the year. All right, those are the snap counts. So we've gotten through Andy Reid, Marinated takeaways, the snap counts. John, what are the opening odds against these Green Bay Packers?
Yeah, this is a little scary. The Chiefs come in as 6.5-point favorites in this game at Lambeau Field in Green Bay. Now, the problem here is that the Packers have not only beaten the spread, they have upended the spread the last 2 weeks. They were 3-point underdogs in week 11 and won by 3 points. And they were 7.5-point underdogs over in this past weekend and won by a touchdown. Yeah. So I'm a little worried about the Packers being a 6.5-point underdog. But I think it's the right, given the records of the teams and everything, I think it's the right point spread. I'm just feeling anxious about it.
Well, I think had Jordan Love not looked as good as he has recently, it would probably be like 10 points, even though the Chiefs were on the road, or somewhere between 7 and 10, that 8.5, 9.5 type of spread. But to Love and his resurgence in a sense, or I guess emergence, because he hasn't ever really been something right in the league yet. You're seeing what is a low-key really good quarterback matchup. I'm kind of excited to see if Jordan Love can continue to have success, and he's going up against the best quarterback in the game. After the Aaron Rodgers trade and everything, we kind of wrote this game off. We assumed that it might be considered something that could be moved back from Sunday Night Football, where I think there's suddenly some intrigue to this game. This wouldn't be the first Mahomes-Love matchup, because Love ended up starting the COVID game. This is actually a revenge game, because they put his parents at the top level of Arrowhead Stadium, and they said, and he wasn't too pleased about that. You remember that? They bought his mom, I believe, was sitting in the final level of Arrowhead. Not that it's not fun up there. I know my friends really love sitting at the top of Arrowhead, because you can stand the whole game and there's no one to bother you. But
I've sat in those before. As a matter of fact, I was there for the Baltimore Ravens playoff game in 2011 or whatever it was.
Well, she did not take advantage of being able to stand all game. She was sitting and looked very cold, if I'm remembering correctly. So. But it should be fun. 6.5 points on the spread. We'll see if that changes throughout the week at DraftKings Sportsbook. We got all your updates at arrowheadpride.com. We'll be pumping out this content. Thanksgiving is over, so we are back in business on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network. We have reports all week, the shows you can expect all week. Again, we need you to leave a rating and review right here for the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network. If you leave it, we'll read it right here on the Arrowhead Pride Editors Show. So for John Dixon, my name is Pete Sweeney. Thank you for joining us on another edition of the Arrowhead Pride Editors Show.